Houthi rebels renew attack on displaced people camp in Ma'rib with a missile. Tim Lender King says that the United States seeks a new mandate for Yemen war crime probe. The European Union condemns flagrant human rights violations in Yemen. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. Starting from Ma'rib, Houthi militia renewed shelling on Al Hama camp for the displaced that hosts around 264 displaced families. The executive unit for overseeing displaced camps said that in defiance with the United Nations laws, Houthi militia targeted Al Hama camp that is run by the United Nations Migration Agency. This came after 2 days of a similar attack that resulted in injuring 6 children and 1 woman. According to sources, a new wave of displacement began from the camp towards other safe remote areas, especially since the missiles caused interruption of power lines. On International Human Rights Day, the U.S. government called on United Nations to push for a new mandate to promote accountability in Yemen and prevent impunity. The U.S. envoy Tim Lender King affirmed his country's commitment to working to find a lasting solution to the conflict in the country.
I would like to express the commitment of the United States to advancing a durable resolution to the conflict in Yemen that allows the Yemeni people to shape a brighter future for their country. Accountability is an essential part of such a resolution, which is why the United States strongly supports creating a new UN mandate to promote accountability in Yemen. Parties to the conflict should not be allowed to commit abuses against the people of Yemen with impunity.
Lender King also addressed Houthi violations and harassment of Yemenis living in Sana'a, reiterating the U.S. commitment to the embassy staff who have suffered from Houthi detention, threats, and harassment.
Today, I also reiterate the commitment of the United States to our Yemeni colleagues in Sana'a who have suffered detention, threats, and harassment from the Houthis. These are people with families and hopes for a better future. This is just the latest in a series of Houthi abuses against Yemeni civilians.
In line with the World International Human Rights Day, the European Union condemned violations and abuses of human rights in Yemen. In a statement, the European Union called on all parties to stop human rights violations, stressing that Yemenis deserve lasting peace and respect of their rights at all times. While the world celebrates December 10th as the International Day for Human Rights, all Yemenis are subjected to the Houthi deadly machine on a daily basis. Political opponents, journalists, women, and children are all targets of Houthi killing, kidnapping, torture, and sentencing. More details about this are within the following report.
The 10th of December marks the International Day of Human Rights. With another year passing and unfortunately, the human rights situation across Yemen has only worsened. Despite all the work being done by the international human rights organizations, more people are being targeted for their legitimate and peaceful human rights activities or expressing opinions or calling for basic human rights. Yemen is suffering for the 7th year under war and conflict that has left behind the tragedies and horrific violations of human rights. And despite the international movement to stop the war, the chances of peace are still slim. The protracted conflict has had a devastating impact on civilians across the country. Civilians suffer from destroyed critical infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, lack of fuel, and lack of basic services. 6 years into an armed conflict that has killed and injured over 19,000 civilians, while Yemen remains the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, experiencing the world's worst food security crisis with more than 20 million people, nearly 2/3 of the population requiring food assistance. Roughly 80% of Yemen's population required humanitarian aid. However, Houthis block those aids and severely restricting their delivery to desperately needed people, including over 12 million children. UNICEF warned that the number of children under the age of 5 who suffer from acute malnutrition could rise to 2.4 million. 7.8 million children had no access to education following COVID-19 related school closures, and nearly 10 million did not have adequate access to water and sanitation. Houthi forces recruited children to fight with them also in the battlefronts. The warring parties continued committing violations against journalists and media professionals and restricted freedom of movement and subjected civilians to additional arbitrary restrictions that deepened their suffering. While the world celebrates the International Human Rights Day, Yemenis celebrate another year of devastation, destruction, division, horrific violations, and deepening social rifts which have created the most severe man-made humanitarian disaster, undermining Yemen's ability to live in flagrant disregard of the basic rules of international law and humanitarian standards.
A new report by an international human rights organization indicated that more than 500 civilians were killed in Yemen this year. Rights Radar for Human Rights said that it documented 565 cases of murder, 624 cases of injury, and 410 cases of kidnapping, all through which are committed by parties of the conflict. The organization said that health is topped the list of violators in Yemen, calling on parties to abide by international human rights law and agreements. International reports have indicated that hundreds of innocent civilians have been killed recently in Yemen. This is because of healthy military escalation on different war fronts. The following report has more details on this.
The continuous escalation by the Iran-backed Houthi militia on the villages and homes of citizens in Yemen has caused the death and injury of many civilians and the displacement of more than 10,000 families. The international community and international organizations have to assume their moral responsibility against the Yemeni people who are dying of siege, starvation, mass execution, repressive practices, and continuous bombing of villages and residential neighborhoods by the Iranian-backed Houthi militia. The director of the Human Rights Office in Sana'a revealed that 83 cases died under torture in prisons of Houthi militia in the capital Sana'a during the past 7 years. He also warned the Houthi militia against the continued killing of abductees in prison due to brutal and inhumane torture. He also called on the Red Cross to investigate these grave crimes that contradict international laws that criminalize torture, cruel treatment, and extrajudicial killings. The Houthi militia keeps carrying out indiscriminate attacks that result in civilian casualties and in the destruction of civilian objects. Yemen has now experienced 7 years of unrelenting armed conflict with no end in sight for the suffering of the millions of people caught in its grip.
The United Nations said it intends to intensify its presence in Ma'rib because of the humanitarian crisis there. This came during a meeting in Aden between the head of the executive unit for the management of IDPs camps, Najib El-Saadi, with the Deputy Regional Director of OCHA, Tariq Talahma. The UN official stressed the importance of coordinating efforts with the executive unit to support the displaced and alleviate their suffering and ensure the safe arrival of aid to them. To that end, the World Food Programme said that Yemen looks set for another year of hunger. In a recent report, the program indicated that over 16.2 million people are facing acute hunger, with 5.1 million people at risk of famine, noting that half of all children under 5 are at risk of malnutrition this year. The organization warned that any cuts to humanitarian assistance would likely see food insecurity and malnutrition increase at an alarming risk. The recent Houthi escalation, especially in Ma'rib, seems to reflect the rebels' defiance to all the international community efforts. Both the UN and the US envoys have been doing intensive diplomatic activity, yet such efforts are faced with complete obstinance from the part of the rebels. This comes when the UN Security Council is set to hold an open session in Yemen next week. More details about this are within the following report.
Amid a dramatic military escalation and a continuous rejection by Houthi militias to ceasefire agreements, UN Security Council agenda showed that the Council will hold an open session to discuss developments in the military, humanitarian and economic situations and efforts to establish peace. The UN envoy Hans Grunberg will brief the Council on results of his recent efforts with international and regional actors to engineer a peace plan for the 7-year conflict. UN envoy will be joining the 4th session since his appointment. It coincides with 100 days since his appointment as a special envoy to the country. Grunberg said during the past two sessions that he intends to assess previous efforts of the United Nations and determine what succeeded and what did not, to find the best approach that the United Nations will follow to end the conflict and move forward in a comprehensive political process. This comes at a time where military activities are being intensified with battles approaching the vicinity of Marib, which shelters more than 1.5 million displaced people. The death toll of civilian casualties increased, economic collapse as well as tit-for-tat violence between Houthi rebels who resumed their cross-border attacks on Saudi Arabia and the coalition strikes on Sana'a. Further, the session comes at a time where indications of improving economic conditions rose, especially with the decision to reshuffle the Central Bank Board of Directors, a decision which received well internationally. The Council will also hear a statement from the humanitarian coordinator over the displacement situation in Ma'rib and Hudaydah and the increasing humanitarian needs amid fears that level of the food insecurity in Yemen will reach levels it is approaching famine at the beginning of next year. A Yemeni government official said that the cabinet neither expect the UN envoy to present new resolution nor that the Council would take actual steps to end Houthi escalation. Grunberg was strongly presented with high international diplomatic momentum during his appointment last September. Features of hope for opportunities of engineering peace talks led by the Swedish diplomat seems to fade, especially with Houthis' aggression and rejection of all calls to end war.
In Hudaydah, joint forces air defenses shot down a Houthi militia attack drone. The military media of the joint forces reported that a booby-trap drone were flying over liberated areas of Al-Jarrahi district, noting that it was detected and immediately shot down. In Ma'rib, government forces took up fierce clashes with Houthi rebels on the southern fronts. Battles lasted for several hours and ended with inflicting the rebels heavy losses, in addition to the destruction of military vehicles. In Al-Aira front, the Houthi rebels incurred heavy losses in lives and equipment. Meanwhile, coalition airstrikes targeted reinforcements of the militia in separate locations. Still in Ma'rib, the government forces backed by resistance thwarted the Houthi attack in Al-Qasara front. Sources indicated that 13 militia members were killed and 7 others captured during 8 hours of clashes. Turning to Taiz, where clashes resumed between government forces and Houthi militia. Sources indicated that battles intensified in Kaleba area northeast of the city. Sources added that Houthi rebels were inflicted with heavy losses. Coming next. Women Union in Aden and Abyan organizes an event to empower women socially and economically.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما ندب احنا شقيرة ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. The 16th campaign to combat gender-based violence, supported by the Women Union in Aden and Abyan, organized a social event. The aim was to raise the awareness of the internally displaced women of gender-based violence and to further empower women socially and economically. The following report has more details on this.
At the beginning of her life, Rajin Salem suffered great difficulty with her education, but she resisted the circumstances and difficulties, achieving her educational journey and her success in resisting all the methods of oppression that she felt. Coinciding with the 16 days campaign for violence against women, Rajin talked about her suffering journey.
When I first joined the first year in school, I was not very much interested in education, and there was no support from my family. They told me to leave school and stay at home, so I stayed. Then when I saw my friends going to school, I felt jealous. Why do they go and I'm staying at home? Why do they study and have certificates and I do not? So I decided to study, but there was still no support from the family. My friends have reached higher grades and I'm still in the early stage. So I have joined the literacy school and studied there till I finished all levels and succeeded in the ninth grade. And I have now the will to complete my studies and join the university. I have always dreamt of studying economy, but my family refused. So I stayed at home for 5 years. During this time, I went to give courses in the literacy schools. Then Mr. Muhammad Hassan El Sakaf supported me to complete my studies in the university. And thank God I have studied and took my bachelor degree now in economics, majoring business administration.
From Aden, we move to Abyan to learn more and more closely about the event, aimed at safety and dignity, protecting women's rights from violations and limiting the violence they face. Here, the Yemeni Women's Union held its campaign, which started on the 25th of November until the 10th of December, under the slogan, "For Safety and Dignity, for a better reality and creating a new motive for our safety and a more beautiful reality in our life path."
This is the 16th day of the campaign for violence against women. This campaign is celebrated worldwide, as there are many women worldwide who are subjected to violence, and as a lawyer, I see a lot of cases, especially women who are subjected to violence, either from the husband or from the family, and either in her practical life or other. There are lots of types of violence like rape or sexual harassment or physical assaults, which women are suffering from.
A distinguished event which was held by the Yemeni Women's Union, coinciding with the world celebrations of this occasion, which received many activities and awareness programs aimed at presenting success stories and highlighting projects for economic empowerment of women.
We did a lot of activities. We did an open bazaar for women with low prices and a lot of awareness like health and social awareness campaigns. We also did training and rehabilitation programs in this occasion, and it's still continuing till today.
Reviving such annual events that would contribute to raising societal awareness and urging them to unite and strengthen efforts to address the problems of violence against women, which is one of the most human rights violations, especially in the areas under the control of the militia, which deprived women of their most basic rights and forced them to displacement, forced migrations, and persecutions against them, which deprived women of their basic rights and forced them to displacement, forced migration, and persecution against them. And this is what everyone is standing up to and supporting women to get all rights and duties side by side along with men in Yemen.
In the West Coast, engineering teams of the Joint Forces demined large quantities of mines and explosive devices planted by the Houthi militia. Military media stated that Joint Forces cleared out all liberated areas in Hais, Jabal Ras, and El Jarrahi districts, in the Hudaydan outskirts of Makbana and Taiz. Military media indicated that public roads, citizens' farms, and homes all were booby-trapped with huge quantities of mines and explosive devices. In Hudaydah, Massam engineering teams cleared out villages and farms of Hais from 629 anti-tank mines planted by Houthis. Massam technical expert Faiz Al-Harbi said that teams destroyed 589 anti-armored landmines, in addition to 38 explosive devices planted by Houthis at villages, farms, schools, water wells, health centers, and other facilities in the district. To El Jauf, 3 people were killed and 5 others injured in a Houthi mine explosion. Media sources indicated that a landmine exploded in the car they were driving on their way back from Saudi Arabia through the Wadi'a port. It was reported that 3 passengers died, while the rest seriously injured and transported to Al Hazm for hospitalization. To sports, the national Yemeni youth football team qualified for the West Asian Championship final. The national team defeated its Syrian counterpart with a result of 2-1 in the semi-final match. Abdurrahman Al-Khadr gave Yemen the lead in the 52nd minute, before the Syrian team equalized in the 69th minute. However, a late winner goal was scored by Assam Radman, sending the national team to the final for the first time. Turning to health, the National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 7 new cases of the COVID-19 in 2 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 6 cases were recorded in Aden and 1 in Hadramaut. Also, 2 recovered cases were recorded plus 6 deaths. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,063, including 1,968 deaths and 6,940 cases of recovery. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Houthi rebels renew attack on displaced people camp in Marib with a missile. Tim Lender King said that the United States seeks a new mandate for Yemen war crime probe. The European Union condemns flagrant human rights violations in Yemen. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.